Since the dawn of humanity, symbols and archetypes have shaped cultures and narratives. Among them, Lilith stands out as a figure shrouded in mystery and controversy, representing rebellion and female independence. In mystical and Kabbalistic tradition, Lilith is often associated with occult forces and the subversion of established norms. In modern times, artists have incorporated these symbols into their works, whether consciously or not. Rihanna, with her striking presence and bold aesthetic choices, has been the subject of analyses pointing to a possible representation of this archetype. But to what extent are these associations grounded? Is Rihanna, in fact, embodying elements of Lilith in her public image? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver these videos to more people, and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Have you ever wondered why certain figures seem to carry an invisible weight, something that goes beyond what they show? We're not just talking about fame, talent, or style. There's something deeper, something that seems to come from another era. Among all the symbolic figures that span centuries of mythology and mysticism, Lilith remains one of the most unsettling. And when we look at some of the visual and thematic choices of contemporary artists, that name begins to surface again, in the subtext, on the stages, in the gaze. Lilith, according to Hebrew tradition, was the first woman created before Eve. Made from the same clay as Adam, she refused to submit, leaving paradise by her own will. This act was not merely disobedience, it was a rupture with divine order. And ever since, Lilith has been demonized, becoming a symbol of lust, disobedience, and uncontrollable feminine power. But think with me, why does such a figure still bother people so much today? In Kabbalah, Lilith occupies an even more enigmatic space. She is linked to the Qliphoth, the hidden side of the tree of life, where unbalanced forces and the rejected aspects of creation are concentrated. This means that, symbolically, Lilith does not represent pure evil, but rather what was excluded from the divine for being too rebellious. Just imagine the impact of someone publicly evoking this symbol, even subtly, in today's world. The curious thing is that Lilith never disappeared. She simply transformed into a metaphor, a veiled icon. In the 20th century, she began to be reclaimed by esoteric movements and artists who saw her not as a villain, but as a forgotten goddess. A symbol of personal power, free sexuality, and fierce independence. Have you ever stopped to think that this same energy might be present, albeit disguised, on the grand stages of pop culture? This is where Rihanna's name starts to appear among scholars of symbolism and modern occultism. It's not that she has declared anything. On the contrary, it is precisely the silence around certain repetitions that draws attention. The constant use of visual elements associated with rebellion, desire, and controlled darkness. It's not just clothes or choreography. These are complete visual narratives. Have you noticed how, over the years, Rihanna has stopped being just an artist and started representing something almost archetypal? It's not just presence, it's command. Her body, her gaze, her silence. Everything about her seems calculated to provoke a reaction, not always a rational one. And here comes the question, why do so many of these reactions echo images that connect to Lilith? Could this figure be evoked in the collective imagination through art? The answer may lie in the details. The frequent red in her clothing, the minimalist theatricality, the contrast between vulnerability and absolute power. Such elements are recurring in esoteric representations of Lilith, a figure who is at once seductive and terrifying, mother and shadow. It's not about coincidence. It's about pattern. Do you also feel that certain images seem to carry symbolic weight that surpasses aesthetics? The way Rihanna appears at certain events resembles more an entity than a celebrity. She doesn't need to say anything. Just being there is enough. And that's what makes the phenomenon even more intriguing. Lilith does not act directly. She appears in symbols, metaphors, visual codes. That's how archetypes communicate, silently but persistently. When Rihanna chooses certain postures, palettes, and compositions, is she performing just another artistic act, or something deeper? We're not talking about a literal invocation, but a symbolic representation. And that's what makes it all the more subtle and powerful. Lilith, after all, doesn't need to be called by name. She manifests in gestures, in choices, in aura. And when these choices echo such an ancient pattern, It's not an exaggeration to ask, are we really just seeing an artist on stage? Or are we witnessing the resurrection of a forgotten archetype, hidden in plain sight? Isn't it strange how some colors seem to have a hypnotic effect? Among them all, red holds a unique place. It can represent passion, danger, power, blood. And in ritualistic or symbolic contexts, this tone is not merely decorative, it communicates. When Rihanna took the stage at the 2023 Super Bowl, dressed head to toe in vibrant red, the visual impact was immediate. But there was more than just aesthetics. A symbol was being activated. The choice of an entirely red outfit at an event broadcast to hundreds of millions of people was no accident. In esotericism, red is the color of Mars, the planet of war, action, and brute strength. It is also the color associated with Lilith, both in Kabbalah and in occultist cults, where she is portrayed draped in blood red, a symbol of the life she gives and also of the rupture she represents. This is not just about style. It's a visual language laden with meaning. You know that moment when an artist steps into the scene and everything seems to stop? That was exactly the sensation caused by Rihanna's appearance on that elevated stage, surrounded by dancers dressed in white. The contrast did not go unnoticed by those who study iconography. She was the point of imbalance, the epicenter of something symbolic, as if she stood above, not just physically but symbolically, a solar and infernal figure at the same time. Have you ever realized how a costume can completely transform the narrative of a performance? The red outfit, the inflated shape of the coat, the platform shoes, everything alluded to a monumental figure. In some esoteric traditions, Lilith is described as the woman who carries fire, the destroyer of dogmas. And when a modern artist adopts precisely that aesthetic, with exaggerated proportions and primal tones, it's impossible to ignore what is being suggested. Horns aren't always literal. Sometimes they appear in subtle forms, disguised as accessories, silhouettes, hairstyles, or costume structures. For years, Rihanna has made recurrent use of these forms in magazine covers, music videos, and even fashion events like the Met Gala. In 2018, she appeared dressed as a fashion pope, crowned with a tiara that evoked more mystery than faith. Was it merely artistic provocation, or is something more being communicated? The recurring use of elements that evoke the inverted divine raises questions about the symbolic intentionality behind the artist's aesthetic choices. Artists often work with visual concepts that reflect their stances or personal narratives. However, when those concepts begin to align with repeated esoteric patterns, such as color, posture, and ritualistic figuration, another layer starts to emerge. Have you ever considered how fashion, in this context, might not be just a vehicle for expression, but a form of symbolic activation? Some semiotic scholars see this as contemporary magical language, where images and costumes function as visual seals. When a globally influential public figure uses these images, even without declaring mystical intentions, the symbolic charge remains active, and it reaches the audience. The runway, the stage, the red carpet, all of these spaces become modern rituals, where the body is the altar and the clothing, the offering. In this setting, red becomes more than just a color. It is a visual pact. It is the representation of presence, of blood, of strength, of Lilith's ancestry channeled through image and performance. Rihanna, with absolute command over her image, knows exactly the impact these choices make. Just imagine if these elements weren't mere aesthetic coincidences, but a ritualistic repetition of the image of the untamed woman, a visual update of the same Lilith who centuries ago was cast out for defying the divine model. Fashion becomes memory, and the stage an invocation. Rihanna doesn't need to mention Lilith in interviews or wear visible amulets. The language of the symbol is silent and effective. In a world saturated with images, it is precisely those that speak without words that intrigue the most. And if, at the center of the world's biggest stage, the artist appeared as a visual embodiment of the banished ancestral woman, what exactly was being celebrated? Can you explain why some songs stick in your head, beyond just the melody? Isn't there something else, something deeper? Rihanna has built her career with tracks that seem to go beyond simple entertainment. Some of her songs, when examined closely, reveal a set of recurring themes: submission, punishment, pleasure, darkness, domination, and wild freedom. Sound familiar? In S&M, For example, the lyrics openly speak of pain, desire, and control, with lines like "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but chains and whips excite me." Many consider it just pop provocation, but some interpret the song as a coded allusion to a pact between the body and invisible forces. The use of terms that reference punishment and pleasure isn't new. These are central themes in symbolic rituals of spiritual liberation, often tied to archetypes like Lilith. Music videos intensify this narrative. In Disturbia, Rihanna appears in a dark setting, surrounded by imprisoned figures, shrouded in smoke, snakes, and suffocating environments. The video's symbolism suggests more than a psychological nightmare. It evokes trance, possession, and the duality between what imprisons and what frees. Have you ever wondered if these images are just visual art, or if they might be subtly staging a kind of disguised ritual? In many occult cultures, music is seen as a tool for opening gateways between worlds. Sound creates altered states of consciousness. The video as a visual vehicle complements this experience. That's why some scholars treat certain audiovisual works as sound spells, modern forms of symbolic enchantment. Think about it. What happens when millions of people watch, repeat, and absorb the same visual and lyrical content simultaneously? "Bitch Better Have My Money" is another example. Beyond the explicit aggression of the lyrics, the video shows a revenge narrative with references to torture, kidnapping, and domination. Sharp eyes don't see just violence there, but rituals of transformation. The main character, Rihanna, takes on the role of judge, executioner, and priestess. In a symbolic world, this resonates with the figure of Lilith, the one who punishes the man who tried to control her. Have you ever felt that certain music videos carry a weight that goes beyond the narrative? The repeated gestures, the almost hypnotic dances, the fixed stares at the camera, all of this can be interpreted as ritual elements. And when these elements appear consistently throughout an artist's career, the theory of a symbolic construction begins to seem less like speculation. Rihanna's performance in "Where Have You Been" also follows this pattern. With tribal choreography, mystical settings, and the constant presence of elements tied to water and the serpent, archetypal symbols of deep femininity, the video appears to simulate an invocation ritual. Is this invocation purely aesthetic? Or is there a language being used that most of the audience isn't prepared to decode? Have you ever considered that the global success of these works might be directly linked to the symbolic power they carry? Since ancient times, public rituals have used music and movement to generate emotional cohesion. The modern stage, with its music videos and social media, has simply updated this mechanism. The difference is that now it all happens on a planetary scale. The repetition of specific images, chains, mirrors, triangles, closed or blindfolded eyes, is constant. And all of this is part of a visual vocabulary that many occultists recognize as ritualistic symbolism. This isn't to say that these videos are literal rituals, but rather to understand that, in their symbolic structure, they mirror real rituals of liberation and transgression. Rihanna, therefore, positions herself not merely as a performer of pop songs, but as a conductor of a visual and lyrical language that echoes ancient archetypes. What she sings and shows is not random. It is charged, calculated, and often aligned with millennia-old symbols. It might seem like an exaggeration, but what if this language isn't just influence, but intention? And what if every beat and every image hides codes we're only now beginning to decipher? How many times have you watched a show and felt like you were witnessing something greater than just a musical performance? It wasn't just music. It wasn't just dance. It was an event that seemed carefully constructed to provoke, impact, and leave a mark. That was exactly the reaction of thousands of viewers upon seeing Rihanna at the 2023 Super Bowl. A performance that, for many, went beyond entertainment. That night, Rihanna appeared suspended in the air, on a solitary platform, dressed head to toe in red. The setting was geometric, almost clinical, with dancers in white moving in synchronized and repetitive motions. The contrast was brutal. She was the only figure in red, isolated, centered, visually dominant. In symbolic language, this suggests hierarchy, command, and even inverted divinity. Have you ever considered that this might have been more than just an aesthetic choice? Have you ever wondered why so many high-level events follow such symmetrical and choreographed structures? In occultism, symmetry is fundamental in rituals. It represents order, control, and inverted harmony when associated with red, verticality, and the isolation of the central figure. The floating platform, for example, evokes the idea of ascension, or rather, forced elevation, as if something were being shown to the entire world, literally placed above. In addition, the arrangement of the dancers and the body movements themselves resemble geometric patterns often used in ritualistic invocations. The white of their costumes, contrasted with the central red, could symbolize symbolic sacrifice, or even the worship of a higher figure. Sound exaggerated? It might, but think with me, when the same symbols repeat across different contexts, maybe they're communicating more than we realize. The Super Bowl is perhaps the biggest stage an artist can reach. With over 100 million people watching worldwide, everything shown there reverberates with massive force. Have you ever stopped to consider what it means to use that stage to enact a visual spectacle that challenges norms, evokes ancient archetypes, and blends the divine with the profane? The lack of facial expressions, the controlled use of movement, the silence between transitions, all contributed to an almost ceremonial atmosphere. Rihanna didn't interact with the audience as many expected. Instead, she maintained a fixed gaze, a proud posture, and a calculated distance. That type of presence, cold and dominant, isn't common. But it's precisely what made her performance so enigmatic. During the performance, one of the most repeated images was Rihanna placing her hand on her belly. The media interpreted it as a sign of a new pregnancy, and perhaps it was. But for those who study occultism, the gesture carries another weight. It is the symbol of the creative womb, the matrix, the source of life, and the force of primordial femininity. Lilith, in many traditions, is associated with inverted fertility, with creation that refuses submission. Have you ever felt that something simple was hiding a much greater meaning? The artist's performance was built in layers. The casual viewer saw a singer performing her greatest hits. The attentive observer saw a sequence of ritualistic symbols, choreography bordering on liturgical, and the presence of a figure who commanded everything in silence. The modular structure, the repetitive movements, the red and white lighting, none of it seemed accidental. Everything pointed to a staging of power, birth, and ascension. But not traditional birth, a symbolic birth. A woman elevated, isolated, revered. Lilith, in mystical narrative, is not a mother by divine imposition, but by her own decision. She creates from herself. She asks no permission. Wouldn't it be strange if the real theme had gone unnoticed by almost everyone? Not just a medley of hits, but the symbolic dramatization of a long-banished archetype, now reappearing triumphant before millions of eyes? You know that moment when you watch a fashion show and realize there's something beyond the clothes? As if, behind the glitter, the fabrics, and the runway, a silent story is being told. The Fenty shows, the brand created by Rihanna, have never seemed to follow the traditional model. They carry their own energy, and some cultural analysts have begun to see in them a visual language full of symbolic codes. The structure of the shows blends art, performance, and narrative, almost as if each presentation were a modern ritual. Diverse bodies, intentional movements, calculated lighting. The idea of inclusion, frequently highlighted by the media, is just the surface. What many don't see is that behind the bodily freedom, there is an archetypal evocation. And this is where Lilith begins to emerge again. Think with me. When a brand places at the center of its show nude or nearly nude female figures, with clothing that emphasizes flesh, skin, and touch, what exactly is being communicated? In esoteric traditions, the female body is a symbol of the hidden sacred, not of fragility but of power. Lilith represents precisely that, the woman who is unashamed of her own nudity because she owns it. That makes sense when you observe what Rihanna chooses to highlight. It's not about pure sensuality, it's about control. The bodies in the Fenty shows don't seem to offer pleasure to the other, but rather, they challenge, command, impose their presence. They shatter the normative gaze, question standards. This deconstruction of visual passivity is one of the core principles of Lilith's representation in the occult imagination. She doesn't seduce to please, she seduces to liberate. Have you ever considered that fashion could be used as a symbolic weapon? Some of the show's costumes resemble ceremonial garments. Red tulle, veils, translucent masks, pointed tiaras, all elements that evoke a ritualistic imagery. Those who follow these events with a symbolic lens can see there's more than aesthetics. There's intent. And intent is what separates a beautiful outfit from a powerful symbolic act. Rihanna also assumes the role of hostess, but not as a backstage director. She appears as the center of attention, the point of balance for the show. In some editions, her presence resembles that of a priestess. She observes, walks slowly with half-closed eyes without smiling. This isn't mere performance. It's symbolic enactment. And that difference is key to understanding what's at stake. Have you noticed how some brands create their own universe? Fenty did that, but with a twist. It didn't just create an aesthetic, it implanted a myth. And that myth has everything to do with the hidden feminine, with a force that doesn't seek permission. In many esoteric traditions, it is precisely through clothing and the body that a woman channels mystical powers. Fashion becomes dressed magic. Beyond the runway, the backstage atmosphere also reinforces this symbolic environment. The lighting, the rhythm of the shows, the soundtracks, everything carries a certain tone of invocation. The sounds aren't just background music. In some cases, they resemble chants, distorted whispers, tribal beats. This awakens a sensation that blends fascination with discomfort. And that discomfort is intentional. It's as if the hidden message were, you're entering another domain. A place where the feminine is not tame, but ancestral, powerful, and often dark. It's the breaking of the traditional paradise. It's the celebration of Lilith's exile as visual revolution. Rihanna doesn't just sell clothes. She presents a universe where the body becomes an oracle again, and fashion, a silent spell. Have you ever imagined what it would be like if every Fenty show were a modern reenactment of an ancient ritual? And if, behind the lights and cameras, a millennia-old story of rupture, power, and rebirth was being told? It's not always what is said that reveals a hidden truth. Sometimes the silence of the body says much more. In Rihanna's case, every tattoo, every gesture, every carefully crafted appearance seems to compose its own language, almost a secret alphabet. Have you ever stopped to notice how she uses her own body as an extension of the narrative she has built over the years? It's not just about aesthetics. There is a pattern in the way the artist shapes her public image. The body is not a passive support, it's a symbolic vehicle. And when that body becomes adorned with permanent marks like tattoos, it transforms into a kind of modern reliquary. A container where visual codes, mystical references, and personal traits coexist in silence. One of Rihanna's most notable tattoos is located below her breasts, a depiction of the Egyptian goddess Isis with open wings. Officially, it honors her grandmother. But in occultism, Isis represents much more than that. She is the mother of magic, the goddess of the occult, of resurrection, and of life after death. The choice of this image, precisely in that area of the body, where fertility and femininity are most symbolically represented, doesn't seem random. Above all, the body becomes an altar. And when we observe this altar carefully, we notice how it communicates silently. The tattoos are not scattered without meaning. They follow lines, follow anatomy, follow visual logic, as if each mark were placed to amplify not just the visual, but the energetic presence she projects. Have you ever thought that skin could be a kind of modern sacred text, where symbols take the place of words, and the meaning is reserved only for those who know how to interpret? In many mystical traditions, tattoos are used as permanent amulets, as seals of protection or of channeling. And when those images are associated with mythological figures, the body begins to tell a ritualistic story. Rihanna also frequently uses her hands and arms in striking postures. In performances, photo shoots, or videos, the gestures often form symbols recognizable to those familiar with occult symbolism. Triangles, crossed fingers, hands on the forehead or chest. To the general public, they may look like poses. To the trained eye, they are fragments of esoteric language. Can you recall a time when one of her images didn't have a symbolic structure behind it? Even when it appears casual, the visual composition is there. A simple sideways glance, a minimal gesture, a camera angle, all are part of a silent choreography. And all of it is anchored in the body, not in the costume. In what lies beneath it, there is also the weight of silence. Rihanna rarely explains her symbolic choices. She doesn't respond to theories, and that distance only strengthens the mystery. The body then becomes the only field available for reading. A field where each planted symbol remains visible, but indecipherable, unless you know what to look for. Have you ever felt that someone was hiding a story just in the way they move? That's what transforms Rihanna's image into something beyond pop. It's the absence of explanation that turns the body into a visual enigma. And when that enigma connects to ancient archetypes like Lilith, what once was merely beauty becomes mystical reading. There is no need for explicit rituals when the body carries the seals. If the stage is the modern temple, Rihanna enters it as the bearer of marks that speak volumes, even without words. And that's where the true provocation lies. What if what she carries isn't just art, but memory of something much older? With every step, gesture, color, and silence, Rihanna builds more than a career. She sculpts a symbol, a modern reflection of something ancestral, resurfacing in fragments for those who know how to decipher it. Lilith, the woman forgotten by sacred texts, seems to whisper through stages and runways, dressed in red, marked in skin, coded in music. And what if that connection is more than coincidence? What if it's the hidden language of art, reappearing disguised as spectacle? This story is just one piece, and maybe one day, you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.